Germany copies Britain's cheapest gun when they're losing the war. China clones America's M16 and sells it worldwide at half the price. Yugoslavia reverse engineers Nazi Germany's best machine gun and wins a lawsuit about it. In the world of weapons manufacturing, copying isn't just common, it's sometimes the difference between survival and defeat. Today, we're covering the most shameless weapon copies in history. From wartime desperation to peacetime profits, these weapons show that copying is a huge part of military history. Let's break it down. Why countries copy weapons? Building a weapons manufacturing industry is incredibly expensive and complex. Designing a new firearm takes years of research, testing, and development. You need expert engineers, specialized factories, and millions of dollars in funding. For most countries, this simply isn't realistic. The solution? Copy someone else's design. Licensed production means paying the original manufacturer for permission to build their weapon in your factories. It's cheaper and faster than starting from scratch, but licenses cost money and come with restrictions. That's why some countries skip the license entirely. They steal the designs through industrial espionage, reverse engineer captured weapons, or simply copy what they see. The result is what we call copycat guns, weapons that range from slightly modified versions to complete clones of the originals. Some of these copies are desperate wartime measures. Others are calculated peacetime decisions to build domestic arms industries without paying for foreign expertise. Let's look at the most shameless examples. But our first copycat story might surprise you because it involves Germany copying Britain's worst gun. The MP-3008. Germany copies Britain's cheap gun. When World War II started, Germany had a massive advantage in firepower. German soldiers carried MP-40 submachine guns, reliable, well-made automatic weapons. Britain had nothing comparable. British soldiers were stuck with bolt-action rifles while Germans sprayed bullets. Britain desperately needed submachine guns and fast. They bought American Thompson submachine guns, but it wasn't enough. The solution was the Sten gun, possibly the cheapest, ugliest firearm ever mass-produced. Made from stamped metal and assembled with basic tools, the Sten cost almost nothing to manufacture. Millions were produced. The Sten had a terrible reputation. It was inaccurate beyond 50 meters. It jammed frequently. Soldiers hated it. But it served its purpose, putting automatic weapons in British hands cheaply and quickly. Fast forward to 1945. Germany is losing the war. Allied bombing has destroyed German factories. The Wehrmacht is running out of weapons. Suddenly, that cheap British Sten gun doesn't look so bad anymore. German engineers got their hands on captured Sten Mark II submachine guns. They reverse engineered the design and created the MP-3008, an almost exact copy. The only major difference was the magazine position. The Sten's magazine stuck out sideways. The MP-3008's magazine pointed downward like the MP-40. The irony is painful. Germany, which started the war with superior weapons, ended it by desperately copying Britain's cheapest gun. Major manufacturers like Mauser, Haenel, and Walter produced about 10,000 MP-3008s before the war ended. It didn't help. Germany still lost, but the MP-3008 perfectly illustrates how desperate the situation had become. When you're copying your enemy's worst weapon, you've already lost. Germany copied out of desperation during war, but some countries copy even during peacetime. And our next example shows how a tiny nation created one of the world's best assault rifles by copying the AK-47, the Israeli Galil, Israel's AK-47 upgrade. During the 1967 Six-Day War, Israeli soldiers discovered a problem. Their standard-issue FNFL rifles performed poorly in desert conditions. Sand jammed the mechanisms. Dust caused malfunctions. Meanwhile, Egyptian soldiers using Soviet AK-47s had reliable weapons that functioned flawlessly in the same harsh environment. The AK-47 wasn't as accurate as Western rifles, but it was brutally reliable. It worked in mud, sand, water, and extreme temperatures. That's what Israel needed. A rifle that would never fail in the desert. The Israeli government opened a competition for a new standard rifle. The winner was a design by Israeli Galil and Yaakov Lior. Their approach was simple. Copy the AK-47's reliability, but improve its accuracy and chamber it for NATO ammunition. Galil and Lior didn't copy the Soviet AK-47 directly. Instead, they copied a copy. Finland had created the RK-62, their own version of the AK-47 with superior build quality. The Finns had started with a Polish license-built AK-47 and improved it significantly. The Israeli designers studied the Finnish RK-62 thoroughly. Early Galil prototypes actually used RK-62 receivers. They copied the Kalashnikov gas-operated piston system, then modified it for NATO 5.56 by 45 mm ammunition instead of the Soviet 7.62 by 39 mm rounds. The higher pressure of NATO ammunition required design changes. Instead of stamped and riveted receivers, the Galil used milled and forged components. This made the rifle heavier, but more durable. They added a thumb selector switch on the left side, keeping the standard AK-style selector on the right. Testing in the late 1960s and early 1970s proved the Galil was exceptional. Israeli Military Industries, IMI, began production in the mid-1970s. The Galil became Israel's official service rifle and stayed in that role for nearly 2 decades. There's an ironic twist. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel needed rifles immediately. Galil production was slow and expensive. The solution? Israel obtained 60,000 American M16A1 rifles through military aid. Israeli soldiers ended up preferring the American M16S over their own domestically produced Galil. Despite this, the Galil remained in service across all Israeli military branches. It was manufactured in 3 configurations: the ARM, automatic rifle machine gun, the AR, automatic rifle, and the SAR, short automatic rifle. Countries worldwide adopted it. Italy, South Africa, Sweden, and Myanmar all produced licensed versions. The Galil proves that intelligent copying can create excellent weapons. Take the best features from multiple designs, improve them, and you get something that might surpass the originals. Israel's story shows strategic copying can work, but China takes copying to another level. They've built an entire arms export industry on clones. The Type 36, China's grease gun copy. During World War II, America's Lend-Lease program supplied weapons to allies worldwide. Nationalist Chinese forces received large quantities of M3 and M3A1 grease gun submachine guns. These simple, stamped metal weapons were cheap to produce and effective in combat. When the war ended, the Lend-Lease program stopped, but China's civil war between nationalists and communists continued for another 4 years. The nationalists desperately needed weapons. The communists had captured massive amounts of Japanese equipment and were winning. The nationalist solution was copying. The Shenyang arsenal near Mukden began producing grease gun copies, called the Type 36. The name came from adopting it in 1947, the 36th year of the Chinese Republic calendar. The Type 36 looked nearly identical to the M3A1. It used the same .45 ACP ammunition, but it differed in small details: a different barrel nut and no oil container in the pistol grip. Most parts weren't interchangeable with the original, despite the close resemblance. Here's the problem. The Type 36 was significantly lower quality than the American original. The grease gun required large stamping machines for proper manufacturing. China didn't have this equipment. They manufactured about 10,000 copies anyway, with inferior methods. In 1948, they introduced the Type 37, chambered for 9mm parabellum ammunition. When the communists won in 1949, the nationalists retreated to Taiwan and moved their entire production line. On Taiwan, they continued producing the Type 37 under a new designation, Type 39. The irony: communist forces captured thousands of Type 36 and Type 37 submachine guns during the Civil War. They later used these copied American weapons against actual Americans in Korea and Vietnam. China's copying didn't stop with the grease gun. Their most shameless clone might be their M16 copy, which they still sell worldwide. The Norinco CQ-311, China's M16 clone. Chinese weapons copying continued right into the modern era. The most blatant example is the Norinco CQ-311, a direct clone of America's M16 rifle. Introduced in the early 1980s, this 5.56mm assault rifle is manufactured by the state-owned Norinco company. The CQ-311 copies Colt's AR-15 platform, specifically the M16 series. It's produced in 2 versions: a military selective fire model and a semi-automatic civilian version designated CQ-3111. Despite being an exact copy, the CQ-311 has some differences. The most obvious is the curved hand grip. The buttstock and front sight also differ slightly. The real difference is in materials and manufacturing quality. Colt uses 7075T6 aluminum manufactured through forging. Norinco uses 6060T6 aluminum with metal injection molding, an arguably inferior technique. The result is a lower quality weapon. But here's what they copied exactly: the barrel length, 19.9 inches, the rifling twist, 1 in 12, and the ammunition compatibility. The CQ-311 fires the same 5.56mm M193 NATO cartridge as the original M16. Norinco even cloned the ammunition itself, calling it the Type CJ cartridge. The civilian version uses .223 Remington commercial rounds. In 2006, Norinco introduced a carbine version, the CQ311 Type A. Predictably, it's a clone of the American M4A1 carbine. Here's the interesting part. Despite being made by a state-owned company, the CQ311 is produced exclusively for export. The Chinese military doesn't use it. Instead, armies and police forces worldwide, mainly in Africa and Asia, buy the CQ311 because it's significantly cheaper than the real M16. The civilian version was sold in the United States and Canada, but was later banned in 1989 and 2020 respectively. However, you can still buy it in Italy, Ukraine, and South Africa. The CQ311 remains competitive with American manufacturers purely because of its low price. It's lower quality but costs half as much. That's enough for many buyers. China's copying is driven by profit. But our next example shows copying driven by necessity, and it led to an international lawsuit. The M53, Yugoslavia's MG42 copy. After World War II ended, Yugoslav engineers discovered hundreds of German MG42 machine guns left behind by retreating forces. The MG42 was one of the war's best weapons, reliable, powerful, and with a terrifying rate of fire. Yugoslavia's newly formed army decided to make the MG42 their standard machine gun, but they couldn't buy it from Germany. The solution was reverse engineering, taking the captured weapons apart, studying every component, and creating technical documentation to manufacture copies. The process was harder than expected. Even with original examples and probably access to German technical documents provided by the Soviets, creating an exact copy proved difficult. The main problem was ammunition. Yugoslavia used the 7.9mm Ball M49 cartridge. Despite being the same caliber as the German 7.92 by 57mm Mauser round, the M49 had a heavier bullet. This caused frequent jams, broken shell casings, and damaged weapon parts. Yugoslav engineers approached Rheinmetall, the original MG42 manufacturer, for help. The Germans refused. They didn't want to help anyone reverse engineer their own design. Eventually, a Yugoslav engineer contacted Professor Werner Gruner at Dresden Institute of Mechanical Engineering. Gruner was the original designer of the MG42. Unlike Rheinmetall, Gruner agreed to help. With his assistance, the Yugoslavs solved the problems by shortening the recoil spring length and reducing the rate of fire. In 1953, Yugoslavia began producing their copy, designated the M53. Rheinmetall immediately sued them at the International Court of Justice in The Hague for patent violation. Yugoslavia won the case. Their argument? German patents were part of post-war reparations. Germany had lost the war, and their weapons technology was considered spoils of war. The Yugoslavs ultimately produced over 40,000 M53 machine guns before replacing them with the Soviet PKM. The M53 served in conflicts across the Balkans for decades. This case established an important precedent. Defeated nations might lose control over their weapons designs as part of war reparations. The bigger picture. Weapon copying happens everywhere. Sometimes it's legal through licensing agreements. Countries pay for permission to manufacture foreign designs domestically. This benefits both sides. The original designer gets paid, and the buyer gets weapons without developing them from scratch. But unlicensed copying is common too. Countries use industrial espionage, reverse engineering, or simply copy what they capture. The results range from slightly modified versions to complete clones. Why does copying happen so much? Several reasons. Cost. Developing a new weapon costs millions. Copying costs far less. Time. Design and testing take years. Copying can happen in months. Proven designs. Why risk a new design when you can copy something that already works? Political independence. Domestic production means you're not dependent on foreign suppliers. Some copies are desperate wartime measures like the German MP3008. Others are calculated peacetime decisions like the Chinese CQ311. Some actually improve on the original, like the Israeli Galil. The ethics are complicated. Is it theft or practical necessity? Does defeat in war mean losing your intellectual property? Should countries be allowed to copy weapons for national defense? These questions don't have simple answers. What's clear is that copying has shaped military history. Some of the world's most successful weapons are copies or heavily influenced by earlier designs. From Germany's desperate wartime clones to China's modern export copies, these weapons prove that in the arms industry, imitation might not be flattery, but it's definitely profitable. 5 shameless copies that changed military history by stealing someone else's homework. Which copycat surprised you most? Germany copying Britain's cheap Sten gun, or China still selling M16 clones worldwide? Drop your answer in the comments. Hit subscribe for more weapons history, and check out the next video on your screen where we cover the original designs these copies stole from.